Hi there everyone, welcome to this week's video where we're going to discuss some activist philosophy coming from the feminist tradition. In particular, we're going to talk about the Combahee River collective statement and a speech by Leslie Feinberg. I'm really excited to talk about this material today. A lot of the times, the way that it works, I think, within feminist but also quite general political history, is that you have people actually on the ground practicing a kind of, feminist practice, right? Whatever that is, consciousness raising sessions, whatever. And later, feminist scholars then go on to theorize about it, right? So there's a certain kind of priority to immediate practical action that then later on we sort of theorize only afterwards. Therefore, you'll find oftentimes in the history of the feminist tradition, broadly conceived, that oftentimes it is activists or activist groups that really are able to articulate some of the fundamental principles of their form of feminist organization, right? So this is like really on the ground level stuff. The specific pieces that we're talking about today are in a way relatively recent. One piece is from the late 70s and the other is from the late 90s. I oftentimes am teaching ancient Greek philosophy or something like that, so I tend to think about anything that's even within a couple hundred years proximity as being pretty recent. But of course, the feminist movement, especially the feminist movement in the United States, is a much more contracted phenomena, right? So things that are a few decades old are of course much older in the sort of feminist theory, feminist movement than they are in the sort of time span that I'm used to working with as a sort of historian of philosophy. But I think that one thing that you will find both for the Combahee River collective statement and the speech by Leslie Feinberg is that they are articulating important feminist principles that will become, in a way, like the foundation for a whole bunch of later theorists and approaches. So let's start by getting into it. I've shortened here the Combahee River collective as CRC. They were founded as a sort of independent political group for Black feminist thinkers, writers to think about their situation. And it was named after a raid by Harriet Tubman that freed something in the way of 750 slaves, right? So very much centering Black women's experiences, very much in the way of the Patricia L. Collins that we read, where there is a direct connection between their current political activity and the legacy of slavery, right? And so this was a group that had very many of the most important Black feminist thinkers during this time, notably especially Barbara Smith. And the group, as I mentioned, was formed in order to think about, really for the first time independently, the situation of Black women, right? So recognizing that sort of mainstream American feminism was very much oriented around the experiences of middle-class white women and trying to come up with a statement for an organization that can expound something like the principles that motivate their political action as well as way of understanding the world, right? So it's a really influential foundational text in Black feminist theory, right? To continue that as sort of a important theme, I think, in our class. And we'll notice very many similarities between what we're going to articulate as part of the Combahee River collective statement and various other Black feminist authors that we've discussed up to this point, namely Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Patricia Collins, right? I would like to start out by reading a little quote. It comes from early on in the reading. I didn't want to write it on the board because it was a little bit too long for that sort of thing, but I think that it really concisely articulates their central position. Here they say, and this is on page 15, quote, "The most general statement of our politics at this time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see our particular task the development of an integrated analysis and practice based on the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking." I want you to note in this quote in particular two important points. The first is that the Combahee River Collective statement is meant to at least gesture towards the possibility for an integrated analysis, right? One that can understand the interlocking systems of oppression, namely racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, and so on, right? And moreover, and this is actually part of what I just said, that these major major systems of oppression are in fact interlocking. So it's because various kinds of oppressions are interlocking, which the women who constituted the Combahee River Collective knew in virtue of oftentimes being Black women and also lesbians, right? The desire for an integrated analysis stems from the fact that these systems of oppression are interlocking. If they weren't interlocking, right, then we don't need an integrated theory. But because they're interlocking, an integrated theory is necessary. And this is how they begin to think about, to understand their own political situation. Sometimes this text, the Combahee River Collective statement, is said to be sort of like the founding document or something like that of identity politics, right? So hence I've written here, identity politics, right? And they're willing to take up this term, at least at this point, in a positive, productive way. But you might know this term because this is, I think, considered largely a sort of inflammatory term, right? People oftentimes talk about identity politics as if it were just like me studies, right? So sometimes people will try to make fun of WGSS, so women's studies, or they'll try to make fun of various kind of area studies, right, like African American studies or Asian American studies, so on, right, by saying that these aren't real disciplines and that you're really just, I don't know, like examining your own experiences, right? You're like trying to like study yourself or something like that. Of course, as a philosopher, that sounds a lot cooler than they are actually making it seem, right? But, it's used as a sort of inflammatory statement, especially to emphasize how it leads to a sort of failure of solidarity, right? So like, if you're, one identity, so like in my case, I'm like a white trans woman, right? Then maybe I'm only looking out for myself and therefore people that share my experiences. And therefore I base my politics around my identity as a white trans woman, right? That's not really actually what the Combahee River Collective statement means. And it's been kind of a twisting or transformation of the idea of identity politics to make it actually like somehow self-focused, right? There is an important aspect to the relationship between one's personal identity and one's politics that the Combahee River Collective statement actually mentions and endorses. And this is just the old feminist adage that the personal is political, right? We discussed this a little bit also when we talked about Audre Lorde, because Audre Lorde also emphasized the importance of this kind of statement, right? So, but the basic idea, modeled on consciousness raising sessions, is to organize politically on the basis of the personal experiences of the members, right? Oh my God, that's horrible handwriting, but that just says member, right? So, especially in this case, the Combahee River Collective was made up of Black women. They were trying to think about their own situation, their distinctive situation as Black women, and therefore they very often emphasized the inadequacy of mainstream middle-class white feminism for thinking about their own situation, right? So it was really a freedom movement in the sense that they were really encouraging women to think on their own terms, right? To think from their own perspective, and not simply to say, adopt a bunch of feminist slogans that have been given to them by a sort of mainstream movement, right? But to think about their own experiences and assess what it is that would actually be, important and satisfying to them. And so here we get a sort of continuity with the Hooks reading as well, because the Combahee River Collective statement also says that their politics evolves from love, right? So not resentment or negativity or hatred or pain or trauma or something like that, right? To the contrary, it's love that motivates the politics of the Combahee River Collective. I have another quote here, another one that I didn't write on the board because it was a little bit too long. This quote is from page 18 of our readings. Here they state, "Our politics evolve from a healthy love for ourselves, our sisters, and our community, which allows us to continue to struggle and work." So in other words, the entire impetus for engaging in politics is based in a feeling of love, right? A love that Black women maybe have for other Black women, or have for their family, or have, extend more broadly. And they see how the people that they love are hurt and damaged by these systems of interlocking oppression, racism, sexism, heterosexism, and classism, or class-based oppression. And out of that love, they generate a politics that is meant to free the ones that they love. Hence, while in some important sense, the Combahee River Collective does define their politics as a kind of identity of politics, right? It doesn't carry this connotation of only caring about oneself, right? Or people that even resemble you or something like that, right? To the contrary, it has a kind of universalist ambition or disposition, right? So until Black women are free, none of us are free. And the meaning of this statement is supposed to say, until the most oppressed members of our society, which in American society, the Combahee River Collective statement says is Black women, right? Certainly you could try to contest this from a number of perspectives, right? And identify other people that are intensely oppressed. Sure, they don't have any problem with this, right? But their point is, until the most oppressed members of our society are free, none of us are free. So, if you're I don't know, like a white woman or something like that, and you're not experiencing the problems, the exact same sort of problems that Black women are facing, the Combahee River Collective statement nevertheless claims that you are nevertheless unfree, right? Why are you unfree? Well, because you only have certain kinds of privileges, you could say. You don't really have rights. If there are people that are oppressed, people, they can have their rights taken away from them at a moment's notice, or who never had rights, then how can anyone claim to have genuine protection from the law or from the state, right? If the state can oppress some small segment of society, then it will always be the case that through social change, social transformation, that eventually you could adopt the position of that bottom rung of society. And so it's not just Black women, for example, that should be interested in Black women's freedom, but it's actually everyone, every feminist, every person that is motivated by the feelings of love that the Combahee River Collective Statement defines their politics as originating from, carries an interest in protecting the most hurt, abandoned, oppressed members of society. And unless and until there's something like universal emancipation from forms of oppression, then even if there is not an immediate, imminent danger to yourself, right, your own freedom, your own ability to love other people, your own ability to realize your own life, which might involve connections with Black women or other oppressed groups, is denigrated. And so this is really what I think they mean by interlocking systems of oppression, right? That it's not even theoretically possible, for example, to end class oppression without also thereby addressing racism, sexism, heterosexism, and so on. And so they conceive of their politics as an expanded Marxism, right? Whereas Marx dealt with class politics and traditionally only talked about the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the Combahee River Collective Statement says we're going to make Marx less abstract, right? It's not just workers that don't have a gender or a race or a sex or something like that. That's the central object of our analysis. But it is in fact the concrete, particular worker that is race, that is class, that does have a sex and does have a sexuality, that will be the primary object of analysis for the Combahee River Collective Statement. Now I want to transition over to talking about Leslie Feinberg. Leslie Feinberg is really, really important figure in the history of trans theory, history, and activism. Leslie Feinberg wrote a whole bunch of different stuff. Z is probably best known for writing Stone Butch Blues, which is like a really, really amazing novel. One of the first novels, to my knowledge at least, that really centers trans experiences, and it's just really, really heartwarming and beautiful novel. I highly recommend that you give it a read if you're interested by the Feinberg reading. Feinberg also wrote more theoretical texts, Transgender Warriors and Transgender Liberation. Transgender Warriors is sort of like one of the first trans history books that tries to find sort of like the history of trans people everywhere insofar as Feinberg could find them. And Transgender Liberation, which is where the speech that we're reading together comes from, is a collection of her essays and speeches over the 1990s. Z would like sort of travel all around and go to various conventions and so on to speak to a whole bunch of gender variant people. So oftentimes that included trans people, but not always. And Feinberg was especially interested in sort of building political solidarity and community with other gender variant groups, right? Even if they were not trans. So to speak a little bit to Feinberg's personal history, which you can see in the speech that we read together, Feinberg says that they were born a woman. At one point in life, attempted to transition, started taking testosterone, started trying to pass as a man, and then sort of retransitioned. So was not really comfortable with the idea of trying to pass as a cis person. And while Feinberg doesn't identify as like intersex or an intermediate sex between men and women, Feinberg instead wants to say that, you know, the traditional categories of men and women doesn't really fit them at all, right? So rather than use he, him, or she, her, Feinberg prefers to use neo pronouns. Neo just means new, so new sets of pronouns, in this case Z and here. But I want to also say that I feel that it is unnecessary that so much of contemporary discussion of trans identity centers around the correct use of pronouns. Well, I think that this is obviously important, and as a trans person, it does hurt, right, when people use the wrong pronouns. Feinberg also held that you can use many different sorts of pronouns for them, and many of them are respectful in different contexts. So, for example, Leslie Feinberg would go talk to a bunch of women, a bunch of feminists, and would say things like, well, because I grew up, you know, as a girl, as a woman, and I'm trying to sort of like build community, build solidarity with all of you, then you are welcome to call me or use she, her, right? So what was important for Feinberg about pronouns was not like, oh, you're like figuring out the truth about someone's sex or their gender. It's more about intending to convey a basic level of respect, right? And so for Feinberg, the most respectful way to refer to them is to use Z here. So I would recommend using that. But also, I think gender neutral pronouns, just as they work for anyone, they also work for here. And the central thesis, I think you could say, of the short speech that we read together, which conveys a lot of Feinberg's personal history. I should also say that I'm gushing a little bit because Feinberg is a personal hero of mine. I actually have a book that has here autograph, which is really, really cool. And a lot of the research that I do related to trans theory, history, activism is really rooted fundamentally in Leslie Feinberg. And in particular, I really love this idea that Feinberg has, which is that trans liberation is not just about the liberation of trans people, it's about the liberation of everyone. And so let's read a quote. Here's a quote from the speech that I think is very powerful. Z says, "Trans liberation has meaning for you." For you. Reader, listener, anyone, right? Anyone that takes any interest in this stuff at all. You. No matter how you define or express your sex or your gender. So Feinberg describes how it is that our genders, even in the case where we are cis and so on, right, actually comes to hurt us. And I want to, in particular, read through a quote here because I think that it is quite helpful. Let me just bring this up. This is on page 3 of the speech. We are all works in progress. Here Feinberg says, quote, I am very grateful to have this chance to open up a conversation with you about why it is so vital to defend the right of individuals to express and define their sex and gender and to control their own bodies. For me, it's a life and death question. But I also believe that this discussion will have great meaning for you. All your life, you've heard such dogma about what it means to be a real woman or a real man. And chances are you choked on some of it. You've balked at the idea that being a woman means having to be thin as a rail, emotionally nurturing, and an airhead when it comes to balancing your checkbook. You know in your guts that being a man has nothing to do with rippling muscles, innate courage, or knowing how to handle a chainsaw. These are all really caricatures. Yet these images have been drilled into us through popular culture and education over the years. And subtler, equally insidious messages lurk at the interstices of these grosser concepts. These ideas of what a real woman or man should be straitjacket the freedom of individual self-expression. These gender messages play on and on in a continuous loop in our brains like commercials that can't be muted. So Feinberg wants to make the point, even if you're cis, even if you're straight, even if you're absolutely perfectly 100% comfortable with your sex gender identity that's been given to you at birth, even if you have a relatively conventional way of performing your gender, your ability for your gender or your sex to genuinely be an expression of yourself and rather than an imposition given to you, grafted onto you by other people, depends on the right of everyone to determine their own gender and their own sex, so at least their own expression of these ideas. And so Feinberg, much in the way of the Combahee River Collective, wants to point to the fact that these sort of apparently fragmenting or individualizing perspectives, right? Ones that emphasize particular kinds of identities. In the case of the Combahee River Collective statement, Black women, and in the case of Leslie Feinberg, trans people, they have important implications for the freedom of everyone. Because our freedoms ultimately are interconnected and interrelated with one another, just as our forms of oppression are as well. So with that, we're getting on for a while in time, so I'm going to end it there. I very much look forward to what you all think and say in the discussion forum, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.